The Skypoint Pavilion sat 60 stories above the city, a quiet world of glass and silver. Outside, the wind whipped against the thick windows, but inside, the only sound was the soft clink of fine china. Rhoda Jacobs moved through the dining room like a ghost. Her black uniform was crisp and perfectly pressed. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, neat bun. To the wealthy guests, she was just a waitress. To herself, she was a watcher. She didn't just walk, she patrolled. As she moved toward the private corner suite, her eyes scanned the room. She wasn't looking for empty water glasses. She was counting the exits. She was measuring the distance between the tables and the heavy marble pillars that could act as cover. She noticed the way the light from the chandeliers bounced off the wine bottles. To anyone else, it was just a pretty glow. To Rhoda, it was a map of angles and blind spots. Rhoda carried her serving tray with a weighted grace. Her hands never shook. Years ago, those same hands had measured the speed of bullets and the curve of a wind-blown shot. Now, they held plates of sea bass and expensive tea. She had spent a long time trying to forget the woman she used to be. She wanted to be invisible. If she was nobody, she was safe. If she stayed a shadow, the powerful men who had ruined her life could never find her. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. A group of men in dark, expensive suits stepped out. This was the Korean delegation. At the center was Chairman Kang Dae-hyun. He was an older man with white hair and a face that looked like it was carved from stone. He walked with the confidence of someone who owned the world. Around him, his security team moved in a tight circle. They looked professional, but Rhoda's eyes narrowed as she watched them. She saw the lead guard, a tall man with a sharp jaw. He was looking at the room, but his eyes were too still. He wasn't scanning the rafters or the kitchen doors. He was looking at his watch. Rhoda felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in years, the feeling of a trap being set. Rhoda stepped forward to greet them. She bowed her head just enough to be polite, but kept her gaze steady. She led the group to the large round table in the center of the suite. The view from the window was beautiful, showing the entire city spread out like a toy set. It was a perfect place for a high-level meeting. It was also a perfect place for a target. As the men sat down, Rhoda began her routine. She moved around the table, pouring hot oolong tea into small, delicate cups. She was silent and efficient. She could hear the men talking in low voices about mergers and billions of dollars. They didn't even look at her. To them, she was part of the furniture. Rhoda liked it that way. Being ignored was her greatest weapon. But as she leaned over to place a silk napkin near Chairman Kang's hand, she felt the weight of the moment. The air in the room felt heavy, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. She looked at the chairman. He was smiling, unaware that he was sitting in a glass box high above the world. She walked back toward the silver serving station, her mind already working. She wasn't thinking about the menu anymore. She was thinking about the distance to the building across the street. She was thinking about the way the sun was hitting the glass walls. She was a waitress, yes, but her heart was beating with the steady rhythm of a soldier waiting for the first shot. The routine was established, the players were in their seats, and the game was about to begin. The main course was ready. Rhoda pushed the heavy cart toward the chairman's table, the wheels moving silently over the thick carpet. On the cart sat several large silver domes, called cloches, which kept the food hot. The silver had been polished so many times that it worked like a mirror, catching every light in the room. Rhoda reached for the handle of the first silver dome. Her job was to lift it at the exact same time as the other servers, creating a perfect moment for the guests. But as she bent down, her eyes caught something strange in the curved metal. It was a tiny, sharp spark of light. It wasn't the warm yellow of the chandelier or the soft glow of the table candles. This light was cold. It was a blue-white needle that pulsed twice, then vanished. Her breath hitched in her throat, but she didn't let her hand shake. To anyone else, it was just a sparkle. To Rhoda, it was a glint, the sun hitting the glass lens of a high-powered telescope. She didn't look at the window. She knew better than that. Instead, she used the silver dome as a tool. She tilted her head slightly, using the reflection to trace the light back to its source. Her mind began to work like a computer, calculating the math she had tried to forget. The light was coming from the North Tower, a building 400 meters away. It was slightly higher than the pavilion. She realized the sniper was being very clever. He wasn't hiding in the dark. He was positioned so that the bright spotlights from the restaurant's own exterior signs would wash out the vision of anyone looking out the window. He was using the restaurant's own beauty to hide his presence. It was a perfect tactical choice. Rhoda moved to the next guest, her mind racing. She looked at the angle again. The sniper wasn't aimed at the door or the guards. The line of sight led straight to the back of Chairman Kang's head. He was sitting perfectly still. A clear shot through the thin glass. Rhoda felt the old, familiar weight of responsibility. She could smell the expensive steak and the roasted vegetables under the silver lids. But all she could think about was the kill zone. The sniper was waiting for something. In her experience, assassins liked a distraction or a specific signal. She glanced at the lead guard again. He was standing near the window, but he had moved just a few inches to the left. He was no longer blocking the chairman. In fact, he had cleared a perfect path for a bullet. The room felt smaller now. The laughter of the businessmen sounded like static in her ears. Rhoda realized that the countdown had already started. The sniper was adjusted for the wind. He was squeezed against his rifle, waiting for the chairman to stand up or for the lights to change. She was just a waitress with a silver tray. But she was the only person in the room who knew that death was traveling toward them at the speed of sound. She had a choice to make. She could walk back to the kitchen and save herself, or she could step into the line of fire. Rhoda moved to the side of the table to clear the small salad plates. She worked with quiet speed, but her mind was no longer on the service. She was watching the security team. These men were supposed to be the chairman's shield, his human wall of protection. But as Rhoda watched them through the eyes of a tactical expert, she saw the cracks. They weren't accidents, they were choices. The lead guard, the man with the sharp jaw, moved toward the corner of the suite. He was supposed to be watching the perimeter. Instead, he stepped behind a decorative pillar. From that spot, he couldn't see the windows at all. He was hiding himself, making sure he wouldn't be in the way when the glass shattered. He checked his watch again, a quick, nervous flick of the wrist. He wasn't guarding. He was waiting for a timer to run out. Rhoda shifted her position, stepping closer to the chairman to refill his water. As she poured, she looked at the second guard near the door. He was looking at his phone, his thumb moving idly across the screen. In a high-security situation, a guard's eyes should never leave the room. He was acting bored, but his body was tense. He was leaning away from the chairman, as if he wanted to be as far from the target as possible. It became very clear to Rhoda. The shield had been compromised. The men paid to protect Chairman Kong were the ones making his death easy. They had left the kill zone wide open. They were leaving the chairman alone in a bubble of light, perfectly framed for the man with the rifle across the street. Rhoda felt a cold, sharp anger rising in her chest. She looked at Chairman Kong. He was laughing at a joke made by one of his partners, reaching for his wine glass. He was a powerful man, but right now, he was as helpless as a child. He had no idea that the people he trusted most had already sold his life. She looked around the room at the other waitresses and the kitchen staff. They were busy and smiling, worried about dessert orders and wine temperatures. They didn't see the trap. The guards were part of the hit. The sniper was in position. Rhoda realized she was the only one in the entire pavilion who wanted the chairman to live. She was a woman who had spent years trying to be a ghost, trying to stay out of the world's problems. If she did nothing, the chairman would die, and she could slip away in the chaos. She would stay safe. Her secret would stay hidden. But as she looked at the lead guard's cold, disloyal eyes, the officer inside her woke up. She couldn't just stand by and watch a murder happen. She knew how the bullet would travel. She knew how the glass would break. She was no longer just a waitress serving tea. She was the only defense the chairman had left. The nobody in the black uniform was the only person in the room with the courage to stand in the way. Rhoda knew she only had minutes, maybe even seconds, before the sniper took the shot. She couldn't scream for help because the guards were part of the plot. If she caused a scene, they would likely kill her themselves before she could save anyone. She had to use the only tools she had, her tray, her uniform, and her invisibility. She moved back to the table, her steps light and steady. In her mind, she was drawing lines. She saw the line from the north tower window, through the glass of the pavilion, straight toward the chairman's chest. To stop a bullet, you have to break the line of sight. She began a dance of tactical service. She stepped in close to Chairman Kong, holding a large, heavy silver water pitcher. She didn't just pour. She positioned her body directly between him and the window. She lingered there, pretending to carefully wipe a tiny water spot off the tablecloth. Her back was to the glass. She felt a cold shiver, knowing a high-powered rifle was pointed right at her spine. But she didn't flinch. "More water, Chairman?" she asked softly. Her voice was calm, the voice of a professional server. Kong nodded, distracted by his conversation. Rhoda stayed in his space, using her wide silver tray like a shield. She held it at an angle that looked natural for a waitress. But it was perfectly placed to block the sniper's view of the chairman's head. She was cluttering the shot. A sniper needs a clear, still target. By constantly moving around Kong, adjusting his silverware, refilling his bread basket, leaning over to check his wine, she was making it impossible for the shooter to lock on. She moved to the guest on the chairman's left. As she cleared his plate, she purposefully bumped the chair just an inch. It was enough to make the chairman shift his weight and lean toward his partner. The line of sight was broken again. Rhoda could feel the lead guard's eyes on her. He was starting to get suspicious. A waitress shouldn't be this attentive. She shouldn't be hovering this much. He stepped out from behind his pillar, his hand moving toward his jacket where his gun was hidden. He glared at Rhoda, trying to scare her away from the table. Rhoda didn't look at him. She focused on the reflection in her silver tray. She saw the tiny spark of light from the North Tower again. The sniper was adjusting. He was getting frustrated. She saw the glint move from the chairman's chest to his shoulder as she shifted her weight. She was playing a deadly game of chess, using her own body as the most important piece on the board. The room felt hot. Every time she stepped away to the serving station, she felt like she was leaving the chairman in a desert with no cover. She grabbed a fresh stack of napkins and headed back. She was counting her steps, measuring the seconds, and praying that her weighted grace would be enough to keep the line of sight broken until she could find a way to end the nightmare. The moment of truth arrived with the sound of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal glass. The conversation at the table died down as Chairman Kong prepared to speak. This was it. Rhoda saw the lead guard straighten his tie, a secret signal to the man in the North Tower. The trap was ready to snap shut. Chairman Kong pushed his chair back. The heavy-wood scraped against the floor, a sound that felt like a starting gun to Rhoda. As he stood up, he moved out of the narrow shadow Rhoda had been providing with her body. He was now a clear, tall target against the backdrop of the city lights. He raised his glass of dark red wine, his face full of pride. Rhoda's internal clock began to count down. 5 seconds. In the first second, she saw the glint. The cold, blue-white spark in the distance stopped moving. The sniper had found his mark. The crosshairs were centered right on the chairman's temple. In the second, Rhoda looked at the lead guard. He had stepped back even further, clearing the way. He wasn't even pretending to look for threats anymore. He was watching the chairman's head, waiting for the impact. In the third second, Rhoda felt the weight of her choice. If she stayed silent, she would remain a ghost. She could walk out the back door and disappear into the night, just another waitress who ran away when the shooting started. She would be safe, but she would be a coward. If she acted, the people who framed her would see her face on every news channel. They would know she was alive. The hunt for her would begin all over again. In the fourth second, she remembered who she really was. She wasn't just a server. She was a protector. She was a woman who believed in justice, even when the world was unfair. In the fifth second, Rhoda acted. She didn't scream or duck. She lunged forward with the speed of a professional athlete. Just as the chairman opened his mouth to speak his first word, Rhoda tripped. She threw her entire weight into the side of the table, her heavy silver tray flying from her hand. She didn't just stumble, she aimed her fall. Her shoulders slammed into Chairman Kang's hip, knocking the powerful man sideways. The wine glass flew from his hand, shattering on the floor in a spray of red liquid. At that exact moment, a sharp crack echoed through the room. It wasn't the sound of a plate breaking. It was the sound of a high-powered bullet punching through the thick glass of the pavilion. The bullet whizzed through the air where the chairman's head had been a split second before. It struck a decorative ice sculpture on the buffet table behind him, sending shards of ice flying like shrapnel. The room went dead silent for a heartbeat. Then, the chaos began. The guests started screaming, and people dived under the tables. Rhoda lay on the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked up and saw the hole in the window, a small, clean circle surrounded by a web of cracks. She looked at Chairman Kong, who was sitting on the carpet, looking shocked and confused. Then she looked at the lead guard. His face was twisted in rage. He wasn't worried about the sniper. He was furious at the waitress who had ruined the plan. Rhoda stood up slowly. Her neat bun had come undone, and her uniform was stained with wine. She didn't look like a quiet waitress anymore. She stood tall, her eyes cold and sharp, scanning the room for the next threat. She had sacrificed her safety. She was no longer a ghost. She was back in the fight. The sound of the gunshot was like a whip cracking right next to their ears. The beautiful glass wall of the Skypoint Pavilion didn't just break. It seemed to scream as a spiderweb of cracks raced across its surface. For a few seconds, the room stayed frozen. Then the screaming started. The wealthy businessmen scrambled like frightened birds. They tripped over their heavy chairs and crawled under tables covered in white silk. The expensive smell of steak was replaced by the sharp, metallic scent of gunpowder and the cold wind rushing in through the bullet hole. Chairman Kong was still on the floor, blinking behind his glasses. He looked at the red wine splashed across his white shirt, probably wondering if it was blood. The lead guard was the first to move. He didn't reach for the chairman to pull him to safety. Instead, he reached for his gun, and his eyes were locked on Rhoda. He looked like he wanted to finish the sniper's job himself. Rhoda didn't wait for him to think. The quiet, polite waitress was gone. She stood up straight, her shoulders square and her feet planted firmly on the ground. When she spoke, her voice didn't sound like a server asking about tea. It was a voice of iron, loud, clear, and impossible to ignore. It was the voice of a woman who had commanded entire tactical teams. Down. Everybody stay down. She barked. The sheer power in her tone made the screaming guests freeze. Move away from the windows. Crawl toward the kitchen service doors now. The lead guard hissed at her, his face turning red. Shut up, old woman. Get out of the way. He raised his weapon, aiming it toward the center of the room. Rhoda didn't blink. She stepped toward him, her eyes as sharp as the broken glass on the floor. Put that weapon down, officer. You're aiming at a dead zone. The shooter is at 2 o'clock, high floor, North Tower. If you stand there, you're the next target. The guard hesitated. He was shocked that a waitress knew exactly where the shot had come from. He looked at her, seeing the way she was scanning the room with expert precision. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She looked like the most dangerous person in the room. Gang, crawl toward me. Rhoda commanded, looking at the chairman. Don't stand up. Stay low to the carpet. Use the marble table as cover. Chairman Kong looked into Rhoda's eyes. He saw the steel trap mine she had hidden for so long. He didn't argue. He did exactly what she said, dragging himself across the floor away from the shattered window. The other guards looked confused. They were supposed to be the experts, but they were standing around like amateurs while the waitress barked orders. One of the younger guards started to move toward the window, but Rhoda grabbed his shoulder and yanked him back. Unless you want a hole in your head, stay back. She yelled. The first shot was a ranging shot. He's adjusting for the wind right now. We have 10 seconds before the next one. She turned her attention back to the crowd. Kitchen staff, open the service elevator. We are moving the chairman out now. The lead guard tried to take control again, but his voice sounded weak compared to hers. I'm in charge here. He screamed. You're a failure, Rhoda said, her voice dropping to a cold, dangerous whisper that only he could hear. I saw you move. I saw you clear the line of sight. If you touch that trigger, I will take you down before the bullet leaves the barrel. The guard looked at her hands, steady, ready, and positioned to strike. He realized this wasn't a waitress. He didn't know who she was, but he knew he was outmatched. Rhoda didn't wait for him to agree. She grabbed the chairman by the arm and began guiding him toward the back of the restaurant. She moved with purpose, her eyes never leaving the danger zones. The glass continued to groan in the wind, and the ghost of Rhoda Jacobs was officially gone. The officer had returned. The safe house was a windowless room deep beneath a boring office building. It smelled like dust and cold air. Chairman Kong sat on a hard plastic chair, his expensive suit ruined by wine and dirt. He was breathing heavily, but his eyes were sharp as he watched Rhoda. She stood by the heavy metal door, her hands folded in front of her. She had cleaned the wine from her face, but her uniform was torn at the shoulder. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. The chairman's personal security had been replaced by a new team, men he trusted more. They stood in the corners of the room like statues. Finally, Kong leaned forward. He looked at the way Rhoda stood, feet apart, eyes scanning the room, shoulders relaxed but ready. "You saved my life," Kong said. His voice was raspy. My guards ran. My experts froze. But a waitress from the Skypoint Pavilion knew exactly what to do. Rhoda didn't say anything. She just nodded once, her face like a mask. "I have met many waitresses in my life," Kong continued, narrowing his eyes. "They are good at many things. They are fast. They are polite. But waitresses don't know how to calculate windage. They don't know how to identify a sniper's position from a tiny reflection in a silver dish. And they certainly don't have a voice that sounds like a general on a battlefield." He stood up and walked toward her. He was a powerful man, used to getting answers. "Who are you? And don't tell me you just work for tips." Rhoda took a deep breath. She knew this moment was coming. The ghost she had created over the last 5 years was gone. There was no point in lying anymore. "My name is Rhoda Jacobs," she said. Her voice was quiet now, but it still had that steady iron strength. "Before I was a waitress, I was a lead ballistics analyst for the city's tactical task force. I spent 20 years studying how bullets fly and where shooters hide." Kang's eyebrows shot up. "A police officer? Then why were you serving tea in a penthouse?" Rhoda looked down at her hands. "Because I found something I wasn't supposed to see. I discovered that some of the highest-ranking officers in the department were working with the city's biggest criminals. They were selling information and protecting the wrong people. When I tried to report them, they didn't just fire me. They framed me. They made it look like I was the one taking the bribes." She looked back up at him, her eyes burning with an old fire. "They took my badge. They took my house. They tried to take my life. I had to disappear. I became a nobody, so I could stay alive. I thought if I stayed invisible, I would be safe. But you chose to become visible for me," Kong said softly. "I couldn't watch another crime happen," Rhoda said. "I spent my life protecting people. It's not just a job, Chairman. It's who I am. When I saw that glint in the silver, I didn't see a waitress's tray. I saw a line of fire. I saw a target. And I knew I was the only one who could move you out of the way." Kong looked at her for a long time. He saw the pain in her story. But he also saw the incredible skill she still possessed. He realized that the woman standing in front of him wasn't a victim. She was a weapon that had been hidden away. "The men who framed you," Kong said, his voice turning cold. "Are they the same men who sent that sniper today?" "I think so," Rhoda replied. "They don't like loose ends. And they certainly don't like it when their targets stay alive." Kong smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found a new partner. They made a mistake. They left a genius in the kitchen, and they tried to kill a man with a very long memory. "Rhoda Jacobs, you are finished with the Skypoint Pavilion. We have work to do." The safe house changed from a cold cellar into a high-tech command center in less than an hour. Chairman Kang's private team brought in sleek laptops and secure satellite phones. The room was filled with the soft tapping of keys and the blue glow of screens. Rhoda sat at a large oak table, watching as the world she had been hiding from started to reappear in digital form. Chairman Kong sat across from her. He was no longer the shocked victim from the restaurant. He was a man of power again. "Information is the only currency that matters, Rhoda," he said. "In my world, secrets are just doors that haven't been unlocked yet. Tell me the names of the men who took your life away." Rhoda didn't hesitate. She gave him the names of the 3 men at the top of the police force, the ones who had signed the papers to frame her. These were men she had once called her friends, men who now lived in mansions built on lies. As Kang's team began to dig, Rhoda felt a strange mix of fear and hope. For 5 years, she had tried to look into these files, but every door had been locked. She was a ghost, and ghosts don't have access to police databases. But Kang's reach went far beyond the city. He had connections in international banks and global security firms. To his team, the city's firewalls were as thin as paper. "We have a hit," one of the technicians said, turning his screen toward them. Rhoda leaned in. The screen showed a series of hidden bank accounts. There were large payments coming from a shell company called Apex Holdings. "Look at the dates," Rhoda whispered. The payments started exactly 1 week before she was framed. But it didn't stop there. The most recent payment was made only 48 hours ago. The recipient was a private security firm, the same firm that provided the guards for the Skypoint Pavilion tonight. "The lead guard," Kong said, his voice cold. "He wasn't just lazy. He was on the payroll." Rhoda's eyes moved to another window on the screen. It was a file on the sniper. Kang's team had used facial recognition from the North Tower's security cameras. The shooter was a man named Elias Thorne. He was an ex-military marksman who had vanished from the records years ago. Elias Thorne worked for the tactical unit 10 years ago, Rhoda said, her heart racing. He was one of the men I trained. He wasn't just a random hitman. He was part of the old circle. The pieces of the puzzle were finally fitting together. The men who ruined Rhoda's career were the same ones trying to kill Chairman Kong. They weren't just corrupt police. They were a criminal empire using their badges to hide their tracks. They wanted Kong dead because his international merger would bring in new laws and new eyes that would expose their crimes. Rhoda hadn't just saved a businessman. She had interrupted a massive conspiracy. They thought you were a waitress who would run and hide, Kong said, looking at the data. They thought I was just a target. They didn't realize they were putting the two of us in the same room. Rhoda looked at the names and the faces on the screen. For years, she had felt like a victim of a storm she couldn't control. Now she had the map. She could see the wind, the angles, and the targets. The evidence was all there. The bank records, the phone logs, and the connection to the sniper. She stood up, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She felt like an investigator again. We have enough to prove they framed me, she said. And we have enough to show they tried to murder a foreign chairman. This isn't just a local scandal anymore. This is an international crime. Kong nodded, a dark light in his eyes. Exhuming the past is a messy business, Rhoda. You have to dig through a lot of dirt to find the truth. But now that we have it, we aren't going to just give it to the police. We are going to use it to dismantle them. Rhoda realized that her life as a server was truly over. She wasn't going back to the Skypoint Pavilion to clear plates or pour tea. She was going back to the city to clear her name. The ghost had finished her shift, and the analyst was ready to go to work. The sun rose over the city, turning the glass towers into pillars of gold. High above the streets, in a private office that looked out over the entire skyline, Rhoda Jacobs stood by the window. She was no longer wearing the black and white uniform of a waitress. Today, she wore a sharp, charcoal gray suit that fit her like armor. Her hair was still neat, but her eyes held a new kind of light. She wasn't scanning the room for empty glasses anymore. She was scanning the horizon for justice. Behind her, the office was buzzing with energy. Chairman Kong sat at a large mahogany desk, surrounded by new security guards who had been vetted by Rhoda herself. On the walls, large digital screens showed the names and faces of the men who had ruined her life. For the first time in 5 years, those men were the ones who were afraid. The warrants were served an hour ago, Rhoda said, her voice calm and steady. The lead guard from the restaurant was the first to talk. He gave up the bank accounts and the names of the officers who paid him. By noon, the men who framed me will be in handcuffs. Chairman Kong looked up from his papers and smiled. It was a look of deep respect. You did more than just save my life, Rhoda. You saved this city from a shadow that was growing too large to stop. I told you that information was currency, but you showed me that integrity is the real power. He stood up and walked over to a small table where a new silver tray sat. On it was a simple glass of water and a folder embossed with a gold seal. He handed the folder to her. Inside was her new title, Chief of Intelligence for the Kong Global Group. You spent years being invisible, Kong said. You saw everything because people thought you were nothing. Now, I want you to use those eyes to build something new. A foundation that protects the truth instead of hiding from it. Rhoda took the folder, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It felt much heavier than any serving tray she had ever carried. She thought about the Skypoint Pavilion and the thousands of plates she had cleared while her mind was trapped in the past. She thought about the cold shiver of the sniper's glint and the moment she decided to stop being a ghost. She wasn't a waitress anymore. And she wasn't just a police officer either. She was a woman who had walked through the fire and come out stronger on the other side. The people who had tried to bury her had made a terrible mistake. They had forgotten that a reflection always shows the truth eventually. Rhoda looked out at the North Tower, where the sniper had once hidden. The sun was hitting the glass, creating a brilliant, honest light. She wasn't hiding in the shadows of the dining room anymore. She was standing at the center of a new empire, ready to lead. The lens is turned back on them now, Chairman, Rhoda said, her voice full of a quiet, steel strength. And I'm going to make sure they don't have anywhere left to hide. She turned away from the window and walked toward the desk, ready to start her first real day of work. The ghost was gone, the hero had returned, and the city was finally beginning to wake up.